The rain isn't falling on this trail in Acadia, it's attacking it. I watch it from my little kingdom of dry, sitting on my folded ground sheet under the weathered arch of my canvas tarp. This shelter has seen more storms than I can count. It's not pretty, but it's honest. It doesn't leak. It sighs, absorbing the weather into its thick, worn fibers. My boots, cut and stitched from the same heavy tarpaulin, are propped nearby, dry as bone. The sound of my little stove is a quiet, steady hiss, a tiny defiance against the chaos outside. I'm brewing tea, a simple ritual. The steam mixes with the smell of wet earth and old canvas, my favorite perfume. Then I hear them, or rather, I hear their misery. Chase is the loudest. He's crouched with two others about 50 feet down the trail, all of them huddled like brightly colored shivering birds under a piece of ultralight silicone nylon. It's a vibrant, expensive blue, the kind you see in gear catalogs. And it's failing spectacularly. A sagging pool of water has formed in its center, threatening to collapse the whole thing. Drips find their way through, landing on the hoods of their pristine Gore-Tex jackets with insistent plinks. "I can't feel my fingers," one of them whines, a young woman with neon pink gaiters. "This is insane," Chase barks, shaking water from his hair. He looks at his phone, turning it over in his hands as if willing it to work. The forecast said scattered showers. I take a slow sip of my tea. It's scalding and perfect. I don't mean to watch, but their struggle is a loud performance in this quiet, wet world. They are all angles and frustration, jerking away from cold drips, while I am just still. Chase finally looks up, his gaze scanning the trail, and it lands on me. I see the confusion first, then a flicker of disbelief. He's taking in my scene, the old man in faded, patched canvas pants and a wool shirt, perfectly dry, calmly drinking tea while a storm rages. He stares at my shelter, at the sturdy, waxed canvas pulled taut and low, at the way the rain sheets off it in a steady curtain. His eyes drop to my odd, homemade boots by the entrance. For a second, the arrogant misery on his face is replaced by pure, unadulterated curiosity. He's looking from his own leaking, high-tech rainbow to my simple, brown, dry world. I just give him a small, neutral nod and raise my tin cup slightly. No smile, no invitation, just an acknowledgement. The tea is warm, the tarp is solid. The rain plays its drumming song, but it's not a song for me anymore. It's just the weather, and I am, for this moment, perfectly apart from it. The sun was still high, painting the overlook in that perfect golden hour light, but I wasn't here for the view just yet. I was here for the ritual. My spot, the same one I've used for years, was a flat patch of earth just back from the cliff's edge. I knelt, unrolling my canvas tarp shelter with a familiar heavy thump. This wasn't just a piece of gear. It was my home out here. I started staking it down, the process as natural as breathing. That's when I heard the engines, not the low rumble of a single truck, but the high-revving whine of two, maybe three, side-by-sides. They roared into the clearing in a cloud of dust, music blaring. Chase and his group piled out, all bright colors and brand-new logos. They started yanking gear from their machines, instant pop-up tents, chairs with cup holders, a portable grill still in its box. I kept working. I laced up my tarpaulin boots, the tough waxed canvas solid and reassuring on my feet. I was methodically arranging my fire ring when I felt their eyes on me. "Whoa, check out the museum piece." Chase's voice cut through the music his friend finally turned down. He was holding his phone out, the screen pointed at me. "You getting this? It's like a historical reenactment. What is that, your grandpa's army surplus?" His friends laughed, a loud, hollow sound meant for an audience. I didn't look up, focusing on the alignment of my stones. Chance walked closer, holding up his own shiny, insulated jacket. "See this? This is what modern looks like, old man." "You've got trash," he yelled, directly for his camera, gesturing broadly at my weathered tarp and my boots. I just smoothed a hand over the canvas of my shelter, feeling the sturdy weave. Their laughter felt like weather, annoying but passing. My camp wasn't flashy, but it was right. It was real. Each knot I tied, each stake I drove, was a quiet answer he was too loud to hear. I let their noise wash over me, a distant echo against the quiet peace of building something with my own hands, exactly as I'd always done. The sound of an engine cut through the cold air, a familiar rumble that made me look up from tightening a guy line. My old pickup, a beast I'd sold years ago, came bouncing down the forest track. Behind the wheel was Elias, his grin visible even through the dirty windshield. He killed the engine and stepped out, his own well-worn boots crunching on the frozen ground. "Silas," he said, his voice a warm, gravelly thing that felt like home. We clasped hands, a solid, Maine kind of handshake that said more than words ever could. "Elias, you found the place." "Followed the smell of pine and good sense," he chuckled, his eyes already sweeping over the campsite. He gave a low, appreciative whistle. "Look at this. Solid. That's a proper shelter." He walked over and gave the frame of my canvas tarp shelter a firm shake. It didn't budge. "Taught you well, I see." From across the clearing, a new burst of laughter erupted. The young guys were back at it, pointing at their glowing gadgets and then over at us. One of them held up a sleek, metallic-looking water purifier, saying something about Stone Age methods. Elias's smile didn't fade, but his eyes narrowed just a touch. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a mutter meant only for me. "Kids who think price tags mean wisdom," he said, shaking his head slowly. "They'll learn, or they won't. The woods don't care." I just nodded, following his gaze. There I was, in my tarpaulin boots, cut and lashed from the same heavy-duty material as my shelter, standing beside a man who'd shown me how to make them. And there they were, a spectacle of synthetic colors and electronic chirps, their laughter sharp and carrying in the thin air as they compared their satellite messengers and battery-heated socks to my simple kit. Elias put a heavy, reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Your setup has roots, Silas. Theirs has receipts." He said it like it was a simple fact, the truest thing in these woods. And in that moment, with my oldest friend beside me and the echo of mockery bouncing off the trees, the clearing didn't feel so wide anymore. It just felt like they were very, very loud, and we were very, very sure. The sky didn't just darken. It felt like someone was pouring ink over the cove. I was checking the knots on my canvas tarp shelter when Elias came jogging over, his face tight with a worry I rarely saw. "Silas," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Listen, I just got off the radio. There's a serious squall moving in fast, straight off the Atlantic. This isn't a passing shower." I nodded, my eyes already scanning the horizon where the sea met a wall of bruised purple cloud. I trusted Elias's weather sense more than any forecast. But before I could say anything, Chase's loud, mocking laugh cut through the heavy air. We both turned. Chase was standing outside his fancy domed tent, arms crossed. He'd overheard everything. "A squall?" Chase sneered, patting the sleeve of his expensive jacket. "Relax, old man. This Gore-Tex is rated for Everest. A little beach rain is a spa day for this gear. Maybe your boy here should invest in some real equipment." He shot a dismissive glance at my shelter, at my worn tarpaulin boots. Elias opened his mouth to argue, but I just shook my head slightly. Arguing with Chase was like shouting at the tide, pointless. Instead, I got to work, quietly. While Chase stood there boasting to his own friends, I went back to my shelter. My home. I drove the wooden stakes deeper into the soft sand with a smooth rock, the thud, a solid, reassuring rhythm. I adjusted the canvas, tightening the guy lines, creating a lower, sleeker profile against the wind I could now feel gathering. A cold, damp breath from the ocean. Every pull on the rope, every adjustment, was a silent conversation with the coming storm. "I see you. I'm ready." My tarpaulin boots were solid on the ground, flexible but rooted. This wasn't gear rated for a mountain on the other side of the world. This was knowledge, shaped and adapted for right here, right now. The first drop hit my cheek. It was ice cold, a sharp pinprick, then another on the back of my hand. I looked up. The clouds had swallowed the last of the light. Chase finally stopped talking. He felt it too, that sudden, profound drop in pressure, the electric silence before the chaos. He gave his tent a dubious look, then scurried inside. I took one last look at my canvas walls, at the simple, sturdy knots. Elias met my eyes from across the campsite and gave a single, grim nod. No words were needed. The cold drops began to fall faster now, a sporadic, heavy tap-tap-tap on my taut canvas roof. It was the opening note. The squall was here, and the cove held its breath. The wind didn't just pick up. It screamed. Inside my canvas tarp shelter, lashed tight to the sturdy pines, the world was a roar of noise. But in here, it was just the smell of damp earth and the solid, reassuring sound of Elias checking our gear. We were dry. We were secure. It was a profound, quiet feeling in the middle of absolute chaos. Peering out from the shelter's edge, I watched the influencers' camp unravel. Their ultralight tent, a flashy thing of neon and mesh, was a kite fighting its tether. It flapped with a sound like gunshots. Then a sharp crack cut through the storm's howl. One of its spindly poles snapped, and the structure instantly sagged, a broken wing. Inside, shadows scrambled. Their waterproof jackets, the ones Chase had bragged about costing more than my truck, were already dark and saturated. You could see the water beading and then soaking through, not rolling off. They were just wearing expensive sponges. They huddled. Not for warmth, I realized, but because their poorly chosen site, a flat, exposed patch of gravel for a better backdrop, was now a wind tunnel and a collecting pool for the driving rain. And then I saw it. Chase's camera, his pride, left on a log to capture the moody atmosphere. A torrent of water swept off their collapsed tent fly and directly over it. The red recording light flickered once, like a dying heartbeat, and went dark. Ruined. $1,000 of electronics, neutralized by a 5-minute downpour. This wasn't just bad luck. This was a full audit, and the wilderness was failing them on every count. Poor site choice, No windbreak, poor drainage, reliance on marketing over material, jackets that failed, a tent built for weight, not weather, a complete lack of practical skill. Who leaves their camera out in this? Elias nudged my shoulder, following my gaze. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The lesson was written in the mud, the broken pole, the shivering figures, and the dead camera lens. It was harsh, but it was true. Out here, the hype doesn't matter, only what works. And right now, my canvas and my tarpaulin boots, humble and simple, were what worked. We just sat, sheltered, and witnessed the storm teach its brutal, necessary truth. The wind didn't howl. It screamed. 1 second, Chase and his crew were huddled under their fancy high-tech tarp, their camera lights casting a weird glow on the rain. The next, there was a sound like a gunshot, a sharp crack of a failing grommet, and the entire silver sheet just took flight. It whipped into the air like a demented ghost, danced for a second against the black sky, and then vanished into the woods. Just like that. Gone. The effect was instant. The camera lights, now exposed, glared on 4 people who were suddenly just standing in a torrential downpour. Their expensive, moisture-wicking jackets were immediately saturated. I saw Chase's face, lit by the harsh LED, go from smug to stunned to pure, undiluted panic. The rain was so loud I could barely hear his shout, but I saw his mouth form the word no. I was snug in my own little world. My canvas tarp shelter, lashed tight to the sturdy pines, didn't even shudder. The rain drummed a steady, comforting rhythm on the thick fabric above me. My feet, dry in their tarpaulin boots, were warm. I just watched, from my dry seat on my bedroll, as chaos unfolded 20 yards away. They were soaked to the bone in under a minute. I could see them shivering violently, their movements becoming clumsy. This wasn't just discomfort anymore. The temperature had plummeted with the storm. This was the real thing. This was how hypothermia starts. Chase was spinning in a circle, as if the tarp might have just fallen behind him. Then his head snapped toward me. The camera light swung with him, blinding me for a second. When my eyes adjusted, I was locked in his gaze. He was staring right at my shelter, at my simple, ridiculed, rock-solid canvas hut. The look on his face wasn't anger. It wasn't even envy. It was the hollow, wide-eyed realization of a man who has built his entire castle on sand, only to see the tide come rushing in. He'd mocked my grandpa canvas and my trash bag boots. He'd called our way obsolete. And now, his superior technology was halfway to the next county, and his crew was freezing, while I sat here, perfectly dry. He didn't say a word to me. He just stared at the proof of his own failure, the rain streaming down his ashen face. The arrogance that had filled this clearing hours ago had washed away with the storm, leaving only the cold, dangerous truth exposed. He'd led his people into genuine danger, and the only real shelter in sight was the one he'd spent all day laughing at. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just pulled the canvas flap a little tighter against the wind, listening to the beautiful, solid silence of my own shelter. The rain wasn't letting up, and the sound of Chase's group shivering and bickering was almost louder than the storm. I was ready to let them figure it out, honestly. My canvas tarp shelter was holding firm, a silent fortress against the downpour, and my tarpaulin boots were dry. They'd made their choice. But then Elias nudged me, his voice low. "We can't just leave them like that. Hypothermia's no joke." I looked from his earnest face to the miserable huddle of neon jackets. A part of me, the part that remembered every sneer about my old-fashioned gear, wanted to. But Elias was right. "Okay," I said, the word feeling heavy. "But we do it my way. They get a lesson, not a handout." Elias nodded, understanding flashing in his eyes. This was the trap. We moved quickly. From my pack, I pulled out my spare coil of paracord and a heavy spare ground sheet, a smaller cousin to the canvas protecting me. "Watch," I said to Elias, though my voice carried. "Anchor point on this sturdy pine. Run the ridgeline taut. Now we stake out the corners but leave this side low to the ground. That's your wind block." It was basic, emergency fieldcraft. In 10 minutes we had a crude but effective lean-to erected right next to my own shelter. The difference was night and day. Mine was a sealed, domed haven. Theirs was a sloped, open-faced refuge, better than the open sky, but brutally exposed to the splatter and the wind's bite. "It's ready," I called out, my voice flat. They stumbled over, Chase at the front, his expensive jacket plastered to him, his teeth chattering. He looked at the lean-to, then at my solid canvas dome, and for a second, his arrogance flickered. It was pure, forced humility. They had no choice but to crawl into the space we'd made. As they huddled on the damp ground under the flapping ground sheet, the wind immediately finding its way in, the lesson was undeniable. My shelter didn't flap. It drummed a steady, dry rhythm. The tarps on my feet, which they'd laughed at, were the only dry boots in the whole camp. I didn't say a word. I just sat under the eaves of my own shelter with Elias, sharing a silent meal. The trap was sprung. It wasn't made of rope or wood, but of their own discomfort and the silent, superior performance of the simple, robust gear they'd ridiculed. Every shiver from their side of the tree was a confession. They were warm enough to survive, but cold enough to finally understand. The wind finally stopped howling, and the rain faded to a cold, miserable drip. I stood under the edge of my lean-to, Elias beside me, both of us bone-tired but dry. Across the clearing, Chase was a different story. He was fumbling with his camera, his hands shaking. His expensive, high-tech jacket was plastered to him, a soggy, dark blue mess. I could see his crew huddled under a tree, looking utterly defeated. Chase hit record, and his voice, usually so slick and confident, was thin and raw. "Day 3, he croaked, turning the lens on himself. "The storm, it was unprecedented. Our state-of-the-art gear, it reached its limit." He zoomed in on the sleeve of his jacket, where the Gore-Tex membrane was visibly saturated, water beading and soaking through. Total failure. Then he slowly panned the camera away from his own misery. The lens swept across the muddy clearing and landed on us. On my shelter. It wasn't pretty, just a simple A-frame made from a branch and my old canvas tarp, but it stood firm. The canvas was dark with rain, but taut and dry on the inside. The camera dipped down to my feet, snug in my layered tarpaulin boots, which were muddy but completely waterproof. Elias nudged me, holding up his own phone. He was recording too. This was it. Chase kept filming, a silent, damning comparison. His multi-$1,000 failure versus my simple, dry refuge. He finally lowered his camera, his face ashen. He just stared. That's when Elias gave me a small nod. I stepped forward into the clearing where Chase's camera had just been. I looked directly into Elias's lens, my voice calm and clear in the post-storm quiet. "Their Gore-Tex got soaked," I said, stating it as the plain fact it was. I gestured first to Chase's crew, then down at my own feet and back at my shelter. But my canvas tarp shelter and tarpaulin boots let me stay dry. There was no gloating in my tone. There didn't need to be. The evidence was all right there, irrefutable, captured on both our videos. The high-tech was shivering and defeated. The simple, overlooked materials had done exactly what they were meant to do. Chase didn't say a word. He just looked from his useless jacket to my dry canvas, and in his eyes, you could see the entire narrative he'd built crumbling away, washed out by the same rain that had proven me right. The rain finally stopped. The air was cold and clean, and for the first time in days, I could hear the river without the roar of the storm. I stood there, in my tarp shelter that hadn't so much as sagged, my feet dry in their crude tarpaulin boots. I just watched. Chase was trying to rally his shivering crew. "All right, pack up the drones. We need B-roll of the aftermath. The story isn't over." But no one moved. Leo, the cameraman, just stared at the ground, his expensive jacket soaked through. Maya hugged herself, her teeth chattering. Then Leo looked up, not at Chase, but at my little camp, at the taut tarp, the dry firewood I'd kept stashed inside. "You said his gear was a joke," Leo said, his voice quiet but sharp in the stillness. Chase scoffed, waving a hand. "It is. It's trash. We have the footage to prove it." "Do we?" Maya asked. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling. "Because I've been looking at our footage, the clips you had me cue up to mock him." She tapped the screen and held it out. It was a split screen. On one side, a clip from yesterday. Chase, boasting about the hydrophobic nanotechnology of his tense rainfly. On the other side, footage from just a few hours ago. That same tent, collapsed in a sodden heap, Chase scrambling out into the mud. The contrast was brutal. There was more. A clip of Chase laughing at my plastic bag boots, followed by a shot of his own waterproof hiking boots, filled with water he had to pour out. Every piece of gear he'd derided had outlasted his own. His face, usually so full of smug certainty, went pale. That's out of context. Editing can... The context is we're cold, wet, and our gear failed, Leo interrupted, his voice rising. He's dry. His shelter held. You were so busy making fun of him you didn't learn a thing. I saw it then, the complete collapse. It wasn't a physical fall, but something deeper. The authority he'd worn like his brand-name jacket just dissolved. The resentment in his crew's eyes wasn't just about a miserable night. It was the realization that they'd followed a guide who valued appearance over substance, who mocked practical knowledge while lacking it himself. Chose looked from them to me and back to the damning phone screen. His entire persona, his whole channel built on being the expert, was ruined. Not by me, but by the very storm he thought he could conquer with gadgets. He had nothing to say. The footage, his footage, had said it all. He just turned and started shoving his wet, failed gear into a pack, his movements jerky with shame. The show was over. The silence that followed wasn't just the absence of rain. It was the sound of a hollow icon crumbling, leaving behind only the simple, enduring truth of what actually works. I turned back to my little tarp home, the quiet victory sweeter than any argument I could have won. The morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of pristine Maine morning that feels like a reward. I stood in the doorway of my canvas tarp shelter, steam rising from my tin mug, and watched the final act of the previous night's drama. Chase and his crew were a silent, soggy procession. There was no boasting now, no condescending lectures about gear ratios and moisture-wicking technology. Just the heavy, wet slap of their expensive tents being rolled up, the dull clank of waterlogged equipment shoved into packs. They moved with a stiff, defeated efficiency, avoiding looking toward my side of the clearing entirely. I didn't say a word. I just sipped my tea and let the quiet, sun-drenched forest speak for me. By the time the sun had fully cleared the pines, they were gone, their footprints already beginning to dry in the mud they'd so despised. Elias emerged from his own simple lean-to, a grin on his face. We didn't need to rehash it. We just set about making a quiet breakfast, the crackle of the small fire and the call of a chickadee the only conversation needed. The peace that settled over the camp was absolute. It wasn't the peace of victory over a person, but the deeper, more satisfying peace of a truth affirmed. Chase hadn't been argued into silence. He'd been answered by the relentless, impartial truth of a Maine downpour. His credibility wasn't debated away. It was quite literally washed away, leaving nothing but the evidence: my dry shelter, my functional gear, and his retreating, damp back. After we ate, I began my own packing ritual. I folded my canvas tarp shelter with a kind of reverence, feeling the sturdy, weathered fabric in my hands. It was more than a tool. It was a testament. I pulled on my tarpaulin boots, the soles firm and secure, and laced them up. Every item had proven itself, not on a spec sheet, but here, on the unforgiving ground. As I shouldered my pack, I felt a profound lightness. The confrontation was over, but the trail wasn't. The path ahead beckoned, and I was ready for it. My trust placed not in labels or prices, but in simple, proven things. I took one last look at the peaceful clearing, now truly our own, and turned to follow Elias onto the next stretch of path. The woods had settled the matter. I walked on, completely at peace.